So one of the current trends on social media, particularly revolving around Gen Z, is the collective bashing on what is dubbed the performative man. And from what I can gather, a so-called performative man is one who presents himself inauthentically for social validation, particularly to attract a romantic partner. In other words, it's a dude who poses as someone he's not for social clout. Being a performative man is a type of peacocking, which is when someone acts differently from what they normally would when they feel they want to attract someone else. And while the term is relatively new, this concept is something that's existed for millennia. It's just now the current image of a performative man is a dude that drinks matcha, wears a tote bag, reads books in public spaces, and listens to female artists like Laufey and Clairo with wired earbuds. Now, I don't have a problem with the whole aesthetic itself, but I more so dislike how the trend has devolved from calling out wolves in sheep's clothing, which are toxic men who fake leaning into this whole aesthetic just to attract and manipulate women, to just straight up bashing without any nuance to it. First of all, I think the term performative man just doesn't make any sense. I dislike the term because when you think about it, aren't we all performative? Any kind of human interaction involves some form of performance. The way you speak, the way you dress, the way you do your hair, and anything else you wear on your body is a signifier of who you are for everyone else to see and judge. Even if you wear the most unassuming outfit that you can think of, like jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt, people who don't even know you will assume things about your character, like that you have no sense of style or that you just don't want to stand out too much that particular day. So why exactly are there suddenly TikToks and the like calling out men who just dress a little zesty, style their hair like Benson Boone, wear totes, and just happen to read women's literature as performative? Because these men are being just as performative as those who wear Lakers jerseys, or bikers wearing their biker get-ups, or even hicks wearing red hats. Heck, this aesthetic might even just be a sign of the times. The equivalent for this when I was a teenager was guys owning nothing but skinny jeans, shoe closets full of Nike Roshis or Stan Smiths, undercuts with hella hair product, and boba tea. This might be nothing more than just hating the new gen. Everything that you do, when viewed by others, is a performance. And online, this is the same thing. Anytime you post a story or something like that, you're performing a version of yourself to an audience, aka your following. Everything that you post on social media and everything about that post, including the framing, the quality of the shot, the lighting, and the amount of post-processing, it all goes into creating a performance for people, including yourself, to see. Even non-action is a performance on its own. By not posting on social media, you're performing the idea that you don't find enough value in it to be active like other people are. Even your profile picture is a performance because it's what generates the first impression of your entire online persona. And I literally wrote my undergraduate thesis on this fact. So where am I going with all this? Whenever you interact with someone, you are always presenting to them what you want them to see, and not necessarily who you are. Thus, existing within society is a performance, and thus the term performative man doesn't make any sense because everybody is performing something, whether they realize it or not. But in this context, so-called performative men are clowned on because it's the authenticity of their performance that comes into question. People aren't hating on these so-called performative men because they think it's cool to dunk on non-traditional men again like it's 2010 and every top voted YouTube comment says fake and gay. People hate on them because they're half-assing it for clout. The disgust towards today's so-called performative men is simply the antagonization of inauthenticity. Generally, we as a society dislike those who present themselves inauthentically. Think about sneakerheads who wear fakes but claims they're real, fake friends that ask for favors but disappear in your time of need, and people with no integrity who are willing to lie through their teeth to get what they want. The question is, what are these so-called performative men performing as, and why are they doing it? Like I said earlier, performative men have existed for millennia. They're just the kind of people who pose as whatever is cool at the time so they look cultured and interesting to others, but they only have a surface level understanding of whatever culture they're trying to look like they're a part of, thus they end up being all style and no substance. And in typical Gen Z fashion, we found a new term for a concept that already has a word for it. These people are posers, and they pose as someone they're not because they want social validation and they believe that they will be rewarded by society. And in the context of the so-called performative man, that reward is to be liked and noticed by women. It's why these so-called performative men are characterized as reading women's literature or self-help books in public while also presenting themselves in a way that somewhat caters to the female gaze. In the context of the hundreds of memes and TikToks, performative men are trying to signify that they're better partners because they understand the plight of the female gender. but in reality they're actually as fake and toxic as red-pilled alpha males, who also tend to have an end goal of attracting women and also fail at attracting women, because these so-called performative men only really look like they read feminist literature, but they don't actually, otherwise they would realize something as simple as you shouldn't think of and treat women like objects. Seriously, these two are different sides of the same coin. But to give a more casual example, it's like someone who wears a bunch of Golden State Warriors merch because they're a popular team right now, and then they claim to be a fan, but they can't name anyone on the team besides Curry or Draymond. And this is the kind of perfect example that points out how dumb this whole so-called performative man thing is. Because the real problem is that people are assuming inauthenticity without anything to go off of. Going back to the Warriors jersey example, not everybody who wears a Warriors jersey but can't be bothered to remember the names of players like Brandon Podjemski and Buddy Hield isn't a fake fan. What if they're a new fan and just started getting into the hobby? What if they're just a casual fan who only watches during the playoffs because they don't have the time to follow the entire regular season? What if they're just not a fan at all? What if the shirt is just a gift from a relative and they don't want it going to waste? What if they just like the style? Because while a jersey has its social connotations, it's ultimately still a piece of clothing in a specific style and color blocking. And while it's perfectly normal to make assumptions about a person wearing a jersey, there's always the possibility that your assumption is wrong. And that represents the problem with treating so-called performative men with blanket disgust. How can you tell that a so-called performative man is being inauthentic in their interest? How can you tell that someone is posing as something he's not to earn social clout? A lot of the TikToks and Reels I've seen surrounding this trend like to exaggerate the performative aspect of these men by showing that they lack self-awareness or are reading their books upside down. But while these are obviously staged, I've also seen some that are just straight up recording someone who is minding their own business and living their life without bothering anyone. In most cases, especially if you don't directly interact with someone, you won't actually know if someone is being performative or not, so why assume inauthenticity? Not everything has to be driven by the need for social validation and the desire to find a romantic partner and procreate. Some people just happen to like stuff. What if a guy just likes the taste of matcha? Or what if coffee gives them palpitations so they need to find a substitute? What if someone just got tired of wearing jeans and t-shirts all the time? What if a guy's just a klutz and keeps losing their AirPods so they just bit the bullet and got wired earphones rather than dumping hundreds of dollars on shit they can't take care of? There are so many different possibilities for why people are the way they are. So what do we have to gain by assuming inauthenticity? Now, I won't say that so-called performative men don't exist, because there will always be a subset of a group who inauthentically engages in a culture as a way to attract women. For example, in recent years, run clubs have gained the notoriety for having men join mainly to hit on women as opposed to a genuine interest in the hobby. But they will never admit to this because there is a social stigma against men doing something with the express purpose of wanting to meet women, which is an entire video on its own. But here's the funny thing about the so-called performative men, is that they don't need to be outed and called out for being inauthentic, because that's eventually going to show anyway. If the whole purpose of being a so-called performative man is to try and attract someone with similar values, then once they actually enter a relationship, the man's true colors are going to show, and the woman is going to realize that the guy has absolutely zero substance behind him at all. But by blanketing an entire group with disgust due to the deplorable actions of a few, the only people that this really hurts are those who are authentic and those who may be interested in joining the culture, but ultimately don't out of fear of being accused of being fake. Now, for the most part, it's one of those trends that I don't really care about, and especially not enough to make a video about, but there's one part of this trend that genuinely worries me. Because part of being a performative male is apparently reading a book in public. Not at a party, not at a social function, in public as in a coffee shop or a park.
What does a performative male look like?
Sits down at a local coffee shop in Silver Lake, is reading Sylvia Plath, is sipping on a matcha, probably owns a Clairo puppy hoodie.
When I see them reading a book, I feel like men should not read. That's performative.
What if they're reading Catcher in the Rye at the park?
I don't like that. Like, they shouldn't.
What if they relate to the main character on a deep emotional level?
These are places that have environments that lend themselves perfectly to reading because of their relative peacefulness. Admittedly, yeah, I'm someone who reads books in public, and that's because I get a lot more reading done when I'm reading at a coffee shop rather than in front of my desk, because then I'll just watch another episode of House. For the most part, I don't actually give a damn if people watch me read or not. In fact, if a coffee shop is completely empty sans myself and a few employees, I think that would be an even better reading spot. But apparently, reading in public as a man is performative now. And this can be problematic because at some point you're not fighting inauthenticity anymore, and it's just straight up anti-intellectualism. When you call a man performative in a derogatory fashion for doing something as innocent as reading a book in public and treat reading in a coffee shop or the park as some kind of ploy to pick up women, that's insultingly anti-intellectual. Seriously, men and women for that matter have always read books in coffee shops. This is not some new concept just because a small group of young men have decided that it's the new meta for attracting women. These are public spaces where anyone can do whatever they want. In fact, some would even argue that they're better for doing things like reading or working on a laptop because you're eliminating the temptation of potential distractions like video games and a bed. I get that the whole purpose of the meme is to call out wolves in sheep's clothing, but that's a nuance that gets lost in the void that is social media, because then you're teaching an entire generation of TikTok-brained young adults that reading, a hobby that is inherently ungendered and has been so for centuries, that people have done and continue to do in public spaces, is something that's unmanly. I hate this trend because it perpetuates the idea that men only read in public because it's in an effort to get laid. I get that the messaging started as men shouldn't be performative about reading as a ploy to attract women, they should be genuine in their interest regardless of female attention. But eventually, this will be understood as men shouldn't read. It's just too much, man. So I think the key takeaway here is simply to understand that you're not going to be able to please everyone. So the best way to live your life is in service to yourself. Whether you like it or not, you're a part of society, so you're going to be judged no matter what you do. The best way to go about life in this situation is to accept that some people are just going to always judge you negatively and assume the worst of you, and you can't change that fact. You should just do whatever makes you happy. If you like matcha, order matcha, even if some people will call it a girly drink and call you a performative male for it. Who the fuck cares what they think? And if you just happen to like Laufey or Clairo, there's nothing wrong with that. It's your life. Don't let other people dictate how to live it.